The scent of fresh coffee still lingered in the air when I returned to find my office door hanging off its hinges. Through the splintered frame, I could see Dennis gripping a stack of my client files while Tyler directed two men hauling my desk toward the freight elevator. My hands shook as I reached for my phone, but before I could dial, Dennis's fist connected with my jaw. The metallic taste of blood filled my mouth as I hit the hallway floor, watching helplessly as everything I'd built over 5 years disappeared into a moving truck. Tyler didn't even look at me. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. He just kept shouting orders like I wasn't there, like I hadn't worked 70-hour weeks to build momentum marketing from nothing, like my name wasn't still on the lease hanging in the building manager's office downstairs. When building security finally arrived, Dennis had me pinned against the wall, hissing that I should have signed the papers when I had the chance. But I'd never seen any papers. I'd never agreed to anything. And as Tom Henderson from security pulled Dennis off me while radiating 911, one question burned through the pain. What papers was he talking about, and how long had they been planning this? My name is Rachel Martinez, and this is the story of how I learned that betrayal doesn't always come from strangers. Sometimes it comes from the people who sit across from you at Thanksgiving dinner, who know your vulnerabilities because they helped create them, who smile while sharpening knives behind their backs. This is about what happens when you build something beautiful and someone decides they deserve it more than you do simply because you share biology with their son. 3 hours earlier, I'd been sitting in a bright conference room at Cascade Coffee Roasters, presenting a social media strategy to their founder. It was the kind of meeting that made every sleepless night worth it, the kind where the client keeps nodding and taking notes and asking when we can start. My business partner Jenna had texted me twice during the presentation with celebratory emojis. We'd been chasing this account for 8 months. Landing it meant we could finally hire another full-time employee, maybe even move into a bigger office space. I remembered walking out of that building feeling invincible, like I'd finally proven to everyone who doubted me that I knew what I was doing. I was 29 years old and running a marketing firm that had survived its critical first 5 years. We had 12 active clients, a growing reputation in Portland's small business community, and revenue that let me sleep at night without worrying about payroll. Not bad for someone who'd started with nothing but a laptop, a business degree from Portland State, and a stubborn refusal to work for anyone else ever again. My father would have been proud. He'd always said I had the kind of mind that saw patterns others missed, the kind of drive that turned obstacles into stepping stones. He died when I was 21, right before I graduated college, and I'd spent every day since trying to honor his belief in me. That's probably why it stung so badly when my mother Linda married Dennis Carr 2 years after Dad passed. Not because I expected her to grieve forever, but because Dennis was everything my father wasn't. Where Dad had been thoughtful and encouraging, Dennis was loud and dismissive. Where Dad had celebrated my acceptance to business school, Dennis had asked why I was wasting money on education when I could just get a real job. He worked in commercial construction, managed crews, and seemed to view the world through a lens of physical labor equals real work and everything else equals pretending. Marketing, in his assessment, wasn't a real career. It was playing on computers and convincing people to buy things they didn't need. I'd tried to keep the peace for my mother's sake. Family dinners where I bit my tongue when Dennis made snide comments about my business being a hobby. Holiday gatherings where he'd introduce me as Linda's daughter who does something with social media. 8 years of small cuts that I'd ignored because my mother seemed happy, or at least less lonely, and because Dennis never crossed certain lines. He was obnoxious but not dangerous. Dismissive but not destructive. Until Tyler came into the picture. Tyler was Dennis's son from his first marriage, 24 years old with his father's swagger and none of the work ethic that at least made Dennis functional. He drifted through community college without finishing, worked a series of jobs he quit or got fired from, and spent most of his time talking about business opportunities that never materialized. 6 months ago, he'd shown up at one of those mandatory family dinners with a sudden interest in what I did for work. Asked questions about client acquisition and pricing models and profit margins. I'd been surprised and maybe a little hopeful that we might finally find common ground. What an idiot I'd been. Tyler started appearing at my office unannounced, always with some excuse about being in the neighborhood or wanting to grab coffee. He'd asked to sit in on client meetings, claiming he wanted to learn the business. I'd let him shadow me a few times, thinking mentorship might help him find direction. He'd watched me present to clients, sat through strategy sessions, asked to see our internal processes. I'd even shown him our client management software, walked him through how we tracked projects and billed hours. Every piece of information I'd given him was a weapon I didn't know I was handing over. The last time I'd seen Tyler before today was 3 weeks ago at my mother's house in Beaverton. Sunday dinner, the kind Linda insisted on hosting monthly to keep family connected. Tyler had been quiet that night, almost subdued. Dennis had been expansive, talking about a big project his construction company had landed, discussing expansion and opportunity. He'd looked at me over the pot roast and said something that should have been a warning. "Your dad would want you to help family when they need it, Rachel. That's what people with advantages do. They lift others up." I'd thought he was asking for a loan or maybe a referral for Tyler. I'd already decided I'd say no to the first and yes to the second if Tyler actually showed he was serious about working. But Dennis hadn't asked for anything that night. He just planted that seed and watched it sit there, waiting for me to water it with guilt. I never saw the documents Tyler claimed I'd signed. Never had a conversation about partnership or shared ownership or anything that would suggest I'd agreed to give him 40% of my company. But when I stumbled back to my office after that meeting with Cascade Coffee, dizzy with success and already mentally drafting the contract, I found Tyler standing in my reception area with 3 men I'd never seen before. They were dressed like movers, carrying boxes and furniture dollies. "Hey Rachel," Tyler had said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Just getting our stuff organized. Figured it would be easier to handle the transition while you were out." "What transition?" I'd asked, confusion making me slow to react. That's when Dennis had stepped out of my private office, the one with my name on the door, holding my client files like they belonged to him. Tyler had moved fast after that, blocking me from entering while Dennis started issuing orders. They'd come prepared with a plan, with muscle, with the element of surprise. I'd had nothing but shock and the dawning realization that something terrible was happening and I couldn't stop it. I tried to push past Tyler to get to my office, to protect my files and equipment and the physical manifestation of 5 years of relentless work. That's when Dennis had grabbed me. The first shove had sent me stumbling backward into the hallway. The second had knocked me to the floor. I'd felt my phone skitter away across the industrial carpet as I tried to get up, tried to scream for help, tried to do anything but lie there while they dismantled my life. Dennis had crouched over me then, his face close enough that I could smell the cigarettes on his breath, and he'd said the words that would echo through everything that came after. "You should have signed when we asked nicely. This is your fault, Rachel. Family takes care of family, and you chose to be selfish. Well, Tyler's family too, and he deserves his share. We tried to do this the easy way." "What papers?" I'd gasped through the pain radiating from my jaw. "I never signed anything. I never agreed to anything." But Dennis had just smiled, cold and certain, and said that's not what the documents show. That's when Tom Henderson had appeared, alerted by another tenant who'd heard the commotion. Tom was in his 60s, former military, and he'd worked security at Pioneer Square Business Center for as long as I'd had my office there. He knew me, knew I came in early and left late, knew I always held the door for people and asked about his grandkids. He took one look at me on the floor with blood running from my split lip and Dennis standing over me, and he'd moved faster than I would have thought possible. "Step away from her right now," Tom had commanded, and something in his voice made even Dennis comply. The rest of that afternoon blurred into fragments. Tom calling 911 while keeping himself between me and Dennis. Tyler and his crew continuing to load equipment even as sirens approached, working with frantic speed. Police arriving to find me sitting on the hallway floor, my office half empty, and Dennis claiming this was a civil dispute over business partnership, nothing criminal, just family working through disagreements about shared assets. My protest that nothing was shared, that this was my company, my equipment, my files. The officer's sympathetic but helpless expression as he explained that without proof of ownership and with Dennis claiming legitimate business interest, this might need to be resolved in court. Jenna had arrived then, bursting from the elevator with her face white with panic after I'd managed to text her a simple help. She'd taken one look at me, at my office, at Dennis talking calmly to police like he was the reasonable one, and she'd made a decision that probably saved everything. "Don't say another word," she'd told me quietly. "Not to them, not to anyone. We're calling Marcus right now, and we're doing this right." Marcus Rivera was my older cousin on my mother's side, a corporate lawyer who'd helped me set up my LLC when I'd first started the business. He'd reviewed my contracts, walked me through liability insurance, made sure everything was legally sound. I hadn't talked to him much in the past few years beyond holiday cards and occasional family events, but when Jenna called him from my phone, he'd answered immediately. "I'll be there in 20 minutes, he'd said after hearing just the basics. "Don't sign anything, don't agree to anything, and if they try to take you to the hospital, let them. We need documentation of everything." The paramedics had wanted to transport me for evaluation of possible concussion, but I'd refused, terrified of leaving and coming back to find my office completely emptied. Marcus had overruled me when he arrived, his lawyer mode fully engaged. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "You go to the hospital, get checked out, get photos taken, get a formal medical report," he'd instructed. "Jenna and I will stay here, inventory what's missing, and make sure nothing else leaves this building. Trust me, Rachel. Evidence now, emotion later." So I'd let them take me to OHSU, where doctors documented a fractured cheekbone, split lip requiring stitches, and severe bruising along my ribs where I'd hit the floor. They'd taken photos from every angle, asked careful questions about how I'd sustained the injuries, and filled out forms that transformed my assault into official record. Through all of it, I kept thinking about my client files in Dennis's hands, about Tyler's cold efficiency, about how they'd walked into my space and taken pieces of my life like they had every right. The worst part wasn't the physical pain, though that was substantial. The worst part was the violation of safety. I'd built that office into a sanctuary, a place where I was competent and successful and in control. They'd shattered that in less than an hour. When I finally returned to Pioneer Square Business Center that evening, my jaw wired and my ribs wrapped and my head pounding, Marcus and Jenna had transformed my gutted office into something resembling a crime scene. They'd photographed everything, documented what was missing versus what remained, and collected business cards from the movers who'd apparently been hired through TaskRabbit and had no idea they were participating in theft. Tom had provided security footage from the hallway cameras. The building manager, a woman named Patricia who I'd always liked, had offered witness testimony about Dennis and Tyler arriving earlier with what they'd claimed was written permission from me to access the space. "This is good," Marcus had said grimly, reviewing the evidence spread across my remaining desk. "This is really good, Rachel. They made mistakes. Big ones." I spent that first night at Jenna's apartment in Northeast Portland, unable to face going back to my own place knowing Dennis had my address, my keys to the office, and apparently zero hesitation about using violence. Jenna had insisted, practically carried me up the stairs to her second-floor walk-up, and settled me on her couch with ice packs and the kind of determined care that made my throat tight with gratitude. She'd been my friend since our sophomore year at Portland State, the person who'd believed in momentum marketing when it was just a name scribbled on a napkin and a dream that felt impossible. We'd officially become business partners 2 years ago when the company grew enough to need her project management expertise full-time. She made chamomile tea I couldn't drink because of my wired jaw and sat cross-legged on the floor beside the couch, her laptop open as she methodically documented everything we knew. Jenna had a systems mind, the kind that could take chaos and organize it into actionable steps. While I drifted in and out of a medication-induced haze, she was building spreadsheets of missing equipment, client files we'd need to reconstruct, and contacts we'd need to notify about the situation. Marcus came by around 10 that night, his tie loosened and his usually neat hair disheveled from running his hands through it. He pulled up a chair and looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read, something between anger and deep concern. "I need you to walk me through everything," he said gently. "From the beginning. When did Tyler first express interest in your business?" So I told him. About the family dinners and Tyler's sudden curiosity. About letting him shadow me at meetings because I'd thought mentorship might help him find purpose. About showing him client files and internal processes because I believed his interest was genuine. With every detail I shared, Marcus's expression grew darker. He was gathering intelligence, Marcus said when I finished. Everything you showed him, every process you explained, he was building a blueprint for this. They knew exactly what to take because you told them what mattered. The words landed like stones in my stomach. I'd been so naive, so eager to see the best in someone who shared my mother's last name. I'd handed them the map to destroy me. What about the documents Dennis mentioned? Jenna asked. He said Rachel should have signed when they asked nicely. What was he talking about? Marcus pulled out his phone and showed us an email he'd received an hour ago from an address he didn't recognize. The subject line read Partnership Agreement for Momentum Marketing. Inside was a scanned document dated 3 weeks ago, the night of that Sunday dinner at my mother's house. It showed a partnership agreement granting Tyler a 40% stake in my company in exchange for an unspecified capital contribution. At the bottom was a signature that looked almost exactly like mine. I never signed that, I said, my voice cracking. I've never seen that document before in my life. I know, Marcus replied. But it's good enough to fool someone who doesn't know your signature intimately. Look at the tail on the M in Martinez. You curve it upward. This goes straight across. And the loop in your R is always open. This one's closed. It's a decent forgery, probably traced from something legitimate, but it won't hold up under forensic analysis. He's claiming I agreed to make him a partner and then backed out? The audacity of it took my breath away. That's exactly what he's claiming. Marcus forwarded the email to Jenna and me. This came with a letter from a lawyer, some solo practitioner in Gresham named Donald Webb. He's threatening to sue you for breach of contract if you don't honor the partnership agreement and return the business assets that rightfully belong to his client. Business assets, Jenna repeated. They stole her equipment and files and now they're claiming she stole from them? Welcome to civil litigation, Marcus said grimly. The goal isn't truth. It's creating enough confusion to justify their actions and make you look unreasonable for fighting back. We spent the next 2 hours strategizing. Marcus explained that we were dealing with multiple legal issues simultaneously. The assault was criminal, but the police had been hesitant to make an arrest because Dennis claimed self-defense, said I'd attacked him when he tried to peacefully remove Tyler's property from the office. The theft was technically a civil matter as long as Dennis could produce documents suggesting legitimate ownership claim. The forgery was criminal fraud, but we'd need a handwriting expert to prove it conclusively. First thing tomorrow, Marcus said, we file for an emergency restraining order against both Dennis and Tyler. We'll cite the assault and the threat of continued harassment. Then we file a police report specifically about the forgery and the theft of your business property. I'll reach out to a forensic document examiner I've worked with before. We need official analysis of that signature. What about my clients? I asked. Some of those files had proprietary strategies, signed NDAs, billing information. If Dennis or Tyler leak that or use it, I could be sued for breach of confidentiality. We send a notification email to every client first thing in the morning, Marcus said. Explain that there's been a security breach, that unauthorized individuals gained access to their files, and that you're taking immediate legal action to recover the materials and ensure their information is protected. Most clients will appreciate the transparency. And if they don't? If they pull their contracts because they think I can't protect their data? Then we deal with that when it happens, Jenna said firmly. But Rachel, you can't let fear of what might happen stop you from fighting back. These people assaulted you and stole your business. We're not letting them get away with it. I wanted to believe her. Wanted to feel the righteous anger that should have been burning through me. But mostly I just felt exhausted and violated and terrified that everything I'd built was crumbling and there was nothing I could do to stop it. My mother called at midnight. I'd been staring at Jenna's ceiling, unable to sleep despite the pain medication, when my phone lit up with her number. I almost didn't answer, but some terrible curiosity made me pick up. Rachel, honey, please tell me you're not really pressing charges against Dennis. This doesn't end us, Rachel. It just changes the timeline. I wanted to believe her. Looking around at the destruction, at the evidence of how quickly safety could be shattered, I made myself a promise. I would document everything. I would fight in every legal arena available. And I would never again mistake someone's blood relation for trustworthiness. The investigation was just beginning, but so was my resistance. The forensic document examiner's report arrived 4 days later, and it was everything Marcus had hoped for. Dr. Helen Kovacs had spent hours analyzing the forged partnership agreement, comparing it to legitimate samples of my signature from business contracts, tax documents, and incorporation papers. Her findings were damning and precise. The signature on the partnership agreement showed clear signs of tracing, with uniform pressure throughout each stroke rather than the natural variation that comes from actual signing. The angle of certain letters was mechanically consistent in ways that human handwriting never achieved. Most tellingly, she'd found microscopic indentations beneath the ink, evidence that someone had traced over pencil guidelines before applying the pen. Marcus scheduled an appointment with Officer Brennan to deliver the report in person. I went with him, needing to see her reaction, needing confirmation that this evidence mattered. She read through Dr. Kovacs's analysis twice, her expression growing more serious with each page. "This is excellent work," she said finally. "With this, I can move forward on fraud charges. Your stepfather and half-brother didn't just steal your property. They manufactured false documents to justify that theft. That's conspiracy to commit fraud, forgery, and theft by deception. What happens now?" I asked. "Now I present this to the district attorney's office. They'll review the evidence and decide whether to file charges. Given the quality of this forensic analysis, the medical documentation of your assault, and the witness statements we've collected, I'd say chances are very good." "How long does that take?" "Could be weeks, could be months. The system moves slowly, especially for non-violent property crimes. But the assault charge accelerates things. That gets priority." I felt deflated despite the good news. Weeks or months of waiting while Dennis and Tyler walked around free, while my business struggled to recover, while I jumped at every unexpected sound thinking they might have found a way around the restraining order. Marcus must have seen it on my face because he touched my arm gently. "This is progress, Rachel. Real, measurable progress. 6 days ago, the police thought this was a civil dispute. Now they're building a criminal case. That's a victory." I knew he was right, but victory felt hollow when I was still sleeping on Jenna's couch because I was afraid to be alone in my own apartment. When I had to plan alternate routes to avoid places my mother might be. When every client meeting required me to explain why our systems had been compromised and some of their data potentially exposed. 2 clients had already terminated their contracts. One was a boutique hotel downtown that couldn't risk any data breaches given their customer privacy obligations. The other was a tech startup whose investors had gotten nervous about the stability of our operations. Losing them meant losing $30,000 in annual revenue, money I desperately needed to replace the stolen equipment and rebuild our infrastructure. But 8 clients had stayed, and 3 had even increased their monthly retainers in solidarity after I'd explained the situation. "Small victories," Jenna kept reminding me. "Count the small victories because they add up to survival." We'd spent the past week working from Jenna's dining room table, our new temporary headquarters. She'd helped me file an insurance claim for the stolen equipment, though the adjuster had been skeptical about coverage since the theft involved family members with forged access documents. We'd set up new cloud backups for all remaining files, changed every password, and implemented 2-factor authentication on everything. I'd even hired a cybersecurity consultant to audit our systems and make sure Dennis or Tyler hadn't installed any backdoors or spyware during their time in my office. The consultant, a calm woman named Priya who Jenna knew from her previous job, had found evidence of access attempts on my business email account from IP addresses I didn't recognize. Someone had tried to log in 17 times over the past week, failing each time because I'd changed the passwords immediately after the theft. But the attempts themselves were revealing. They weren't random hackers. They were targeted efforts using passwords I'd actually used in the past, passwords Tyler would have seen me type during those shadowing sessions. They're still trying to access your systems, Priya had explained. That suggests they believe there's something in your files worth finding. Client data they can exploit, financial information they can use, or evidence they want to destroy. The realization that the violation was ongoing, that they were still actively trying to hurt me even after the restraining order, filled me with cold rage. This wasn't just about Tyler wanting a piece of my business. This was systematic, calculated destruction. Marcus filed a motion to compel Dennis and Tyler to return all stolen property within 72 hours. The hearing was set for the following week. Donald Webb, the low-rent lawyer representing them, filed a counter-motion claiming they were the rightful owners of the disputed property and that I was the one engaging in theft by refusing to honor the partnership agreement. It was absurd, but it was also strategic. Every motion they filed created delay, generated legal fees, and forced me to defend rather than attack. Webb knew he couldn't win on the merits, but he could make winning expensive and exhausting enough that I might settle just to make it stop. That's what they're counting on, Marcus said when I expressed frustration at the mounting legal complexity. They think if they make this hard enough, you'll give up. Offer them some money to go away. Maybe even agree to some token partnership stake just to end the nightmare. I won't, I said. Even if it bankrupts me, I won't reward them for this. Good, because you're not going to have to. We're going to crush them so thoroughly that nobody else in your family ever thinks about trying something like this again. His confidence helped, but I still felt the weight of what fighting back actually meant. Legal fees were piling up faster than I could track. Marcus was giving me a significant discount on his hourly rate, but even discounted lawyer time added up quickly. I'd already spent $8,000 on legal costs, and we hadn't even gotten to the main civil trial yet. The forensic examiner's report alone had cost $2,000. Filing fees, court costs, and process servers added hundreds more. I was hemorrhaging money to prove that I owned my own business. Dr. Patricia Wong reached out during this period, asking if I'd like to meet for coffee. She'd been my favorite professor at Portland State, the one who'd encouraged me to start momentum marketing instead of taking a safe corporate job. She taught entrepreneurship with a focus on sustainable business practices and ethical leadership. Her course had changed my life, given me permission to believe I could build something meaningful. We met at a quiet cafe near campus, and she looked at my healing face with visible distress. I tried to cover the bruising with makeup, but the swelling was still obvious, the stitches in my lip not yet dissolved. "I'm so sorry this happened to you," she said immediately. When Marcus reached out for an affidavit, I was horrified. "I remember you talking about your family situation, how complicated it was. But I never imagined something like this." "Neither did I admitted. I thought the worst-case scenario was awkward holiday dinners. Not assault and fraud." We talked for over an hour. She asked detailed questions about the business impact, the client retention, the insurance situation. Then she surprised me with an offer. "I'm teaching a case study course next semester on crisis management in small businesses. I'd like to use your situation as one of the examples, obviously with your permission and with certain details anonymized. But more than that, I'd like you to guest lecture. Come talk to my students about what you're learning, how you're handling this, what you do differently. You want me to teach about my own disaster while I'm still living through it? I want you to teach about resilience and strategic thinking under pressure. About the reality of business ownership when things go catastrophically wrong. My students need to understand that success isn't just about good ideas and hard work. It's also about surviving when people try to destroy what you've built." The idea felt surreal, but also strangely appealing. Turning this nightmare into something useful, something that might help others avoid similar pitfalls or handle them better if prevention failed. "I'll think about it," I said. "Ask me again when the criminal charges are filed and I feel less like I'm drowning." "Fair enough," she replied. "But Rachel, I want you to know something. You were one of my best students. You had vision and discipline and the kind of ethical backbone that's rare in business. What's happening to you isn't happening because you failed. It's happening because you succeeded, and small people resented it." Her words stayed with me through the following days as we prepared for the property return hearing. Marcus had compiled a comprehensive inventory of everything stolen, complete with purchase receipts, serial numbers for electronics, and replacement cost estimates. The total value exceeded $45,000 in equipment alone, not counting the incalculable value of client files and proprietary business processes. Donald Webb's counter-inventory was laughable. He claimed Tyler had contributed $15,000 in cash to the business and was therefore entitled to 40% of all assets. When pressed for documentation of this alleged contribution, he provided bank withdrawal slips showing Tyler had taken money out of his account but no corresponding deposits into any Momentum marketing accounts. No receipts, no contracts, no paper trail connecting Tyler's withdrawals to my business in any way. The hearing took place in a cramped civil courtroom that smelled like old carpet and recycled air. Judge Thomas Brenner presided, a middle-aged man with wire-rimmed glasses and a reputation for impatience with frivolous claims. He reviewed our motion, Webb's countermotion, and the supporting documents with increasing irritation. "Counselor Webb," he said finally, "I'm looking at your client's claim of a $15,000 cash contribution to the plaintiff's business. Where is the evidence that this money actually went to Momentum Marketing?" "My client provided funds directly to Miss Martinez for business purposes," Webb replied smoothly. "The informal nature of family business arrangements doesn't negate the legitimacy of the contribution. Informal is one thing. Invisible is another. Do you have any documentation showing Miss Martinez received this money? Any text messages discussing the contribution? Any emails? Anything at all beyond your client's word?" "We have the partnership agreement signed by both parties, which my forensic expert has conclusively proven is forged," Marcus interjected. "Your Honor, we have Dr. Helen Kovacs's complete analysis showing clear evidence of tracing and fabrication. The signature on that agreement is not my client's." Judge Brenner spent several minutes reading the forensic report. Then he looked at Webb with something approaching contempt. "This agreement is fraudulent," he said flatly. "And your continued reliance on it borders on sanctions territory. The property seized from Miss Martinez's office will be returned immediately. All of it. You have 24 hours to comply or I'll issue a warrant for failure to obey a court order." "Your Honor, my clients no longer have physical possession of some items. They were sold to cover storage costs and sold?" Judge Brenner's voice rose. "They stole property, forged documents to justify the theft, and then sold the stolen goods. Counselor, your clients are in serious legal jeopardy. I strongly suggest they comply with this order to the fullest extent possible and stop making things worse for themselves." The hearing ended with a clear victory, but a hollow one. Much of my equipment was gone, sold on Craigslist or to pawn shops. The computers containing client work and proprietary systems had been wiped and resold. The original client files, irreplaceable physical documents with signatures and notes, had disappeared entirely. Dennis and Tyler were ordered to provide financial accounting of all sales and return any proceeds, but enforcement would require more legal action, more time, more money. Still, watching Webb leave the courtroom looking defeated gave me a grim satisfaction. They'd expected the legal system to treat this as a he-said-she-said family dispute. Instead, they were facing a judge who saw right through their lies and a criminal investigation that was building toward charges. That evening, Marcus took Jenna and me out for a cautious celebration dinner at a Thai restaurant in the Pearl. We ordered too much food and talked about next steps. The civil trial for damages was scheduled for 2 months out. The criminal charges, if filed, would proceed on a separate timeline. The restraining order had been made permanent that afternoon, meaning Dennis and Tyler were legally barred from coming near me for the next 5 years. "You're winning," Marcus said, raising his beer in a toast. "Slowly, expensively, exhaustingly, but you're winning." "Why doesn't it feel like winning?" I asked. "Because you're still in the middle of the fight," Jenna answered. "Winning feels different when you're looking back at it from safety than when you're still throwing punches." She was right, of course. I was still sleeping on her couch, still jumping at loud noises, still checking over my shoulder everywhere I went. Still trying to rebuild client trust and business systems while fighting a legal war on multiple fronts. Victory wasn't a single moment. It was a slow accumulation of small battles won, of ground reclaimed inch by inch. My phone buzzed with an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Miss Martinez? This is Officer Brennan. I wanted to let you know that the district attorney's office has approved charges. We'll be arresting Dennis Carr and Tyler Carr tomorrow morning on charges of assault, theft by deception, conspiracy to commit fraud, and forgery. I thought you'd want to hear it from me before it hits the news. The relief that flooded through me was so intense it felt physical. Thank you, I managed. Thank you so much. You did this, she said. Your documentation, your persistence, your willingness to fight back. A lot of people in your situation would have let it go, convinced themselves it wasn't worth the trouble. You didn't. You should be proud. After I hung up, I told Marcus and Jenna. We sat there in the restaurant, surrounded by the mundane sounds of other people eating and talking and living normal lives, and let ourselves feel it. Not triumph exactly, but something closer to validation. The system had listened. The evidence had mattered. Justice, however slow and imperfect, was moving in the right direction. Tomorrow they'll be arrested, I said quietly. Tomorrow they'll know what it feels like to have someone show up and take their freedom. Marcus squeezed my hand. Tomorrow you take another step toward getting your life back. I wanted to believe him. Sitting there with the people who'd stood by me, who'd fought alongside me, who'd refused to let me face this alone, I almost did. The arrests happened on a drizzly Thursday morning, and I learned about them not from Officer Brennan but from my mother. She called from yet another new number I hadn't blocked, her voice shrill with panic and accusation. The police came to the house at 6 in the morning, she screamed into the phone before I could hang up. They handcuffed Dennis in front of the neighbors. Do you have any idea what you've done? How humiliating this is. I sat up on Jenna's couch, my heart pounding. He beat me and stole my business. This is what consequences look like. He's being held on $50,000 bail. $50,000, Rachel. Where am I supposed to get that kind of money? That's not my problem anymore, I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. You chose to stand by him after he assaulted your daughter. You chose to believe his lies over my medical records. These are the results of your choices. Tyler's bail is $30,000. That's $80,000 total. You're destroying this family over a business disagreement. It was never a disagreement. It was fraud and assault. And Mom, I need you to understand something. I'm done. I'm not coming to bail hearings or family meetings or mediation sessions. I'm not listening to you explain why I should forgive them or drop charges or consider their side. I'm testifying at their trial, and I'm pursuing every legal remedy available to me. That's all. She was still shouting when I ended the call and blocked that number too. My hands shook as I set the phone down, but underneath the adrenaline was something approaching peace. I'd said what needed saying without apologizing or qualifying or leaving room for negotiation. I'd drawn a line and meant it. Jenna emerged from her bedroom, already dressed for work. She took one look at my face and made fresh coffee without asking what happened. That was the thing about real friendship. Sometimes support meant knowing when to speak and when to just be present. The arraignment was scheduled for Friday afternoon. Marcus insisted I attend, said it was important for the prosecutors to see me there, to put a face to the victim in their case files. I wore a black blazer over a white shirt, professional armor that made me feel less exposed. We sat in the back of the courtroom and watched as Dennis and Tyler were led in wearing orange jumpsuits, their hands cuffed in front of them. Dennis looked haggard, his usual swagger replaced by confusion and barely contained rage. Tyler looked younger than his 24 years, frightened in a way that might have generated sympathy if I hadn't remembered his cold efficiency while directing the gutting of my office. They stood before Judge Elizabeth Morrison, a black woman in her 60s with a reputation for being tough but fair. The charges were read aloud. Assault in the 3rd degree. Theft by deception. Conspiracy to commit fraud. Criminal forgery. Each charge carried potential prison time. Each represented a piece of what they'd done to me translated into legal language that the system could process and punish. How do your clients plead? Judge Morrison asked Donald Webb, who looked even more rumpled than usual. Not guilty on all charges, Your Honor. The prosecutor, a sharp woman named Catherine Park from the District Attorney's Financial Crimes Unit, argued for bail to remain high given the severity of charges and the defendant's demonstrated willingness to engage in intimidation and document destruction. Webb countered that his clients were upstanding members of the community with no prior criminal records and deep family ties that made them unlikely to flee. Judge Morrison considered for a moment, then spoke. Bail will remain as set. Trial date is set for 3 months from today. Both defendants are ordered to have no contact with the victim, Rachel Martinez, or any witnesses in this case. Any violation will result in immediate revocation of bail and remand to custody. Do you understand? Dennis and Tyler both mumbled affirmations. As they were led out, Dennis turned to scan the courtroom. His eyes found mine, and the hatred in that gaze made my stomach clench. But I held his stare until he was forced to look away, until the bailiff pushed him toward the exit. I would not be the one who flinched. After the arraignment, Catherine Park asked to meet with Marcus and me in a conference room at the courthouse. She was in her early 40s with dark hair pulled into a practical bun and the kind of direct manner I appreciated after weeks of legal doublespeak. I wanted to go over trial strategy and make sure we're aligned, she began, spreading files across the table. The assault charge is straightforward. We have your medical records, witness testimony from security, and video footage. The theft and fraud charges are where it gets more complex. I need you to be prepared for what the defense will argue. She walked us through their likely strategy. They'd claim the partnership agreement was legitimate, that I'd signed it during a family dinner and then suffered buyer's remorse when the business started doing well. They'd paint Tyler as an earnest young man trying to build something with his stepsister's help, only to be shut out when she decided she didn't want to share credit or profits. They'd portray Dennis as a father protecting his son's interests, and the physical altercation as a mutual confrontation blown out of proportion. It's all lies, I said. Every word of it. I know, Catherine replied. And we can prove it's lies. But juries can be unpredictable, especially in cases involving family. Some jurors will think you should have handled this privately, that involving the criminal justice system is overkill. Others will relate to being taken advantage of by relatives. We need to make absolutely certain our case is airtight. What do you need from me? Everything. Every email, text message, voicemail, and document that shows the true nature of your relationship with Tyler and Dennis. Every piece of evidence demonstrating you never agreed to partnership. Every witness who can testify about your business practices and integrity. I want to bury them in proof. Over the next 2 weeks, I provided exactly that. Marcus and I compiled years of correspondence. Text messages where I'd politely declined family requests for money or business involvement. Emails to my accountant discussing maintaining sole proprietorship. Conversations with Jenna about never wanting to mix family and business after watching friends make that mistake. Testimonials from clients about my professionalism and ethical standards. Dr. Wong's detailed account of advising me to keep clear boundaries between personal relationships and professional decisions. We also gathered evidence of their planning. Jenna had done some investigative work, reaching out to the TaskRabbit movers who'd helped gut my office. 2 of them agreed to provide statements about how Tyler had hired them, what he'd told them, and how the job had felt off from the beginning. One mover, a college student named Kevin, said Tyler had specifically instructed them to work fast and not ask questions if anyone showed up claiming to own the stuff they were taking. He told us his sister was trying to screw him out of his share of the business and we might run into some drama, Kevin's statement read. Said to ignore anything she said because she was emotional and unreliable. He paid cash, which seemed weird, and kept rushing us even though we had plenty of time to do the job right. That statement was devastating to their defense. It proved premeditation, proved Tyler knew what he was doing was wrong, proved he'd actively tried to prevent me from stopping the theft. The civil trial for damages began before the criminal trial, a quirk of scheduling that Marcus said actually worked in our favor. We could establish the facts in civil court where the burden of proof was lower, creating a record that would support the criminal prosecution. I'd sued for return of stolen property, compensation for items sold or destroyed, business losses from client defections and system rebuilding, emotional distress, and punitive damages. The total claim was $300,000, a number that had made me dizzy when Marcus first suggested it. "We can't let them think this was cheap or easy," he'd explained. "Punitive damages are meant to punish wrongdoing and deter others. We need to make this hurt enough that nobody else tries something similar." The civil trial took place over 4 days in early November. The courtroom was warmer than the criminal court, with better lighting and more comfortable seating. The jury was comprised of 8 people, a mix of ages and backgrounds who'd been questioned extensively about their ability to judge a family dispute fairly. Catherine Park attended as an observer even though this was separate from her criminal case. She wanted to see how the defense presented their arguments, what strategies Webb employed, which witnesses were most effective. It was all preparation for the bigger battle to come. I testified on the second day. Marcus walked me through my background, the founding of Momentum Marketing, my business growth and client relationships. He had me explain in detail how I'd kept business finances separate from personal, how I'd never accepted family investment or partnership offers, how I'd specifically avoided mixing professional and personal relationships after seeing others struggle with that dynamic. Then Webb cross-examined me, and it was every bit as unpleasant as Marcus had warned. He tried to paint me as cold and selfish, someone who'd used family connections when convenient but cut people out when they wanted something in return. He brought up every family dinner I'd missed, every holiday gathering I'd left early, every time I'd declined to loan money or offer business advice. "Isn't it true that you've always looked down on your stepfather's blue-collar work?" Webb asked, his tone suggesting I was some kind of elitist. "No," I replied calmly. "I respect honest work in any field. What I don't respect is stealing and fraud." He tried to trip me up on details about the night Tyler had shadowed me at client meetings, suggesting I'd led him to believe he was being brought on as a partner rather than just observing. But I had emails to clients from that period introducing Tyler as a family member interested in learning about the industry, with no mention of partnership or employment. The forensic document examiner, Dr. Kovacs, testified for nearly 2 hours about the forged partnership agreement. She showed enlarged images of the signature, pointing out each telltale sign of tracing and fabrication. She explained in clear language how real signatures contain natural variations in pressure and angle that mechanical copying couldn't replicate. By the time she finished, even Webb looked defeated. Tom Henderson testified about what he'd witnessed at my office building, describing the scene in detail that made several jurors visibly uncomfortable. He was unshakable under cross-examination, his military background giving him an authority that Webb couldn't undermine. My client roster testified too, for business owners who spoke about my professionalism, my ethical standards, and their shock at learning what had happened. One client, the owner of a successful restaurant group, got emotional describing how I'd immediately notified him of the security breach and taken steps to protect his data even while dealing with assault injuries. "She could have hidden it," he said. "Could have hoped we wouldn't find out. But she put our interests ahead of her own reputation. That's the kind of person Rachel Martinez is." Dennis and Tyler both testified, and it was painful to watch. Dennis was belligerent, treating the whole proceeding like a personal insult. He kept insisting that family should handle things privately, that I'd betrayed some unspoken code by involving lawyers and courts. Tyler was slicker, better coached, trying to come across as the wounded party. He claimed I'd verbally agreed to partnership multiple times, that he'd invested not just money but time and expertise, that the signed agreement was just formalizing what we'd already discussed. But under cross-examination from Marcus, Tyler's story fell apart. Marcus produced my phone records showing I'd never called Tyler to discuss business except for the few times he'd shadowed me. He showed bank records proving Tyler had never made any deposits to Momentum Marketing accounts. He walked Tyler through the timeline of the office theft, forcing him to admit he'd hired movers in advance, had keys made to my office, and coordinated with Dennis on timing. "So you planned this for at least several days in advance," Marcus said. "You didn't just show up on impulse. You organized a crew, scheduled the theft for when you knew Rachel would be at a client meeting, and had your father there to physically prevent her from stopping you. Is that correct?" Tyler's lawyer objected, but the damage was done. The jury had heard it stated plainly. This wasn't a misunderstanding or a family dispute gone wrong. This was calculated theft executed with military precision. Closing arguments took place on the fourth day. Webb tried his best to make this about family loyalty and misunderstanding, painting me as vindictive and his clients as victims of aggressive prosecution. But Marcus was devastating in response. This isn't about family, he told the jury. It's about one person building something through years of hard work, and two other people deciding they deserved it without earning it. Rachel Martinez started her business with nothing but a laptop and a dream. She built it into a thriving company through long hours and careful management. The defendants didn't want to put in that work. They wanted to take what she'd built and claim it as their own. When she refused to hand it over, they forged documents, stole her property, and assaulted her to prevent resistance. That's not a family dispute. That's crime. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. I spent that time in a courthouse cafe with Jenna and Marcus, unable to eat, unable to focus on anything except the wait. When the bailiff finally called us back, my legs felt weak walking into the courtroom. The verdict was unanimous. The jury found in my favor on all counts. They awarded full damages for stolen property, business losses, and emotional distress. Then they added punitive damages of $150,000, sending a message that this kind of conduct wouldn't be tolerated. Dennis's face went purple with rage. Tyler looked shell-shocked. My mother, sitting in the gallery behind them, put her head in her hands. And I felt nothing but exhausted relief. Outside the courthouse, reporters were waiting. The case had attracted local media attention, the kind of family betrayal story that generated clicks and shares. Marcus had prepared me for this, coached me on what to say and what to avoid. I'm grateful the jury saw the truth, I told the cameras. No one should have to fear their own family. No one should have to choose between protecting themselves and maintaining family relationships. I hope this sends a message that business fraud is serious regardless of who commits it. That night, back at Jenna's apartment, I finally allowed myself to feel it. Not triumph, but something quieter. Validation. Proof that I hadn't been crazy or overreacting. Proof that what happened to me was wrong and that fighting back had been right. The criminal trial was still ahead. Dennis and Tyler still faced prison time. My mother still wasn't speaking to me except through lawyers. But I'd won the first major battle, and that had to be enough for now. Marcus ordered Thai food to celebrate, the same restaurant we'd gone to after the property return hearing. We ate and talked about next steps and let ourselves enjoy this moment before the next fight began. You did it, Jenna said, raising her beer. You stood up and you won. We did it, I corrected. I couldn't have done any of this alone. That's what family is supposed to be, Marcus said quietly. People who show up when things get hard. People who fight alongside you instead of tearing you down. He was right. Sitting there with my chosen family, the people who'd stood by me through the worst period of my life, I understood something important. Blood didn't make family. Loyalty did. Support did. Showing up did. And by that measure, I was richer than I'd ever been. The criminal trial began on a cold February morning 3 months after the civil verdict. Snow had fallen overnight, rare for Portland, turning the city into something unfamiliar and hushed. I walked into the federal courthouse with Marcus on one side and Jenna on the other, my breath forming clouds in the frigid air. This was the final battle, the one that would determine whether Dennis and Tyler faced prison time or walked away with nothing more than financial judgments they'd probably never pay. Catherine Park met us in the hallway outside the courtroom, looking sharp in a charcoal suit and carrying a leather briefcase that radiated competence. She'd spent the past months building her case, coordinating with Officer Brennan, deposing witnesses, and preparing for every possible defense strategy. We'd met twice a week during that period, going over my testimony until I could recite it in my sleep, preparing me for the psychological warfare of cross-examination. The jury was selected over 2 days, 12 people who'd sworn they could judge the case fairly despite the family dynamics involved. The prosecution had used demographic research and psychological profiling to select jurors who'd be sympathetic to victims of financial fraud and less likely to buy into the family loyalty narrative the defense would push. There were 3 small business owners, 2 women who'd survived domestic violence, and several people who'd specifically stated during voir dire that blood relation didn't excuse criminal behavior. Opening statements set the tone. Catherine presented the case as straightforward criminal conspiracy, 2 men who'd planned and executed theft through forged documents and physical violence. She walked the jury through the timeline with precision, showing how this wasn't an impulsive act but a calculated scheme that took weeks of planning. She promised to prove beyond reasonable doubt that Dennis and Tyler had committed every crime charged. Webb's opening was predictable. He painted his clients as family men caught in a toxic situation created by my refusal to honor verbal agreements. He claimed the partnership was real, that I'd simply changed my mind when the business grew profitable, and that Dennis had only gotten physical when I'd attacked Tyler first. It was fiction, but fiction delivered with enough conviction that I worried some jurors might believe it. I testified on the 3rd day. Catherine led me through my story chronologically, letting me explain in my own words how the relationship with Tyler had developed, how he'd gained access to my business operations, how I discovered the theft in progress. She had me describe the assault in clinical detail, the physical sensations of being shoved and hit, the taste of blood, the terror of watching everything I'd built being carried away while I lay helpless on the floor. Marcus had warned me that Webb would try to rattle me during cross-examination, that he'd attempt to make me angry or defensive or tearful in hopes the jury would see me as unreliable or manipulative. I'd practiced staying calm, answering only what was asked, refusing to take the bait. "Isn't it true that you resented your stepfather from the moment he married your mother?" Webb began. "No. I was wary because his values were different from my father's, but I tried to maintain a civil relationship." "You never accepted him as family though, did you?" "Family is built through actions, not declarations. Dennis never treated me with respect or kindness. He tolerated me as part of the package deal with my mother." "And Tyler? You never gave him a real chance, did you? Never saw him as a brother?" "I saw him as my mother's husband's son. I was polite and appropriate. When he expressed interest in my field, I tried to mentor him. That doesn't mean I owed him ownership of my company." Webb pushed harder, trying to make me admit I'd been cold or dismissive or had somehow provoked the violence. But I'd learned something important during these months of legal warfare. I didn't have to justify protecting myself. I didn't have to explain why assault was wrong or theft was criminal or forgery was fraud. Those things were objectively true regardless of family relationship, and my refusal to subordinate my safety and livelihood to someone else's entitlement wasn't a character flaw. The forensic evidence was even more damning in criminal court than it had been in civil. Dr. Kovacs testified again, her analysis unchanged and unshakable. The prosecution introduced additional evidence this time, chemical analysis of the ink used on the forged signature showing it came from a different pen than the rest of the document, microscopic fiber analysis proving the paper had been handled by multiple people before the signature was applied. Officer Brennan testified about her investigation, detailing how she traced the conspiracy from the initial assault through the document forgery to the organized theft. She presented phone records showing Dennis and Tyler had exchanged 37 calls in the week before the office raid, evidence of coordination and planning. She described finding my stolen equipment at a pawn shop in Gresham, sold by Tyler using a fake ID 2 days after the theft. The TaskRabbit movers testified, describing how Tyler had hired them under false pretenses and paid cash to avoid paper trails. Kevin, the college student, was particularly effective, explaining how uncomfortable the job had felt and how Tyler had pressured them to work faster when I'd arrived unexpectedly. "He kept saying his sister was crazy and we should ignore her," Kevin told the jury. "But she didn't seem crazy. She seemed scared and hurt. I wish I'd stopped and asked more questions instead of just doing what I was paid to do." Dennis took the stand in his own defense, against Webb's obvious advice. His arrogance wouldn't let him stay silent, wouldn't let others tell his story. He was combative and defensive, treating the prosecution's questions like personal attacks. He insisted I'd always been a difficult child, ungrateful and selfish, that everything he'd done was to teach me about family responsibility. "You fractured her cheekbone to teach her about family?" Catherine asked, her voice sharp. "I was defending my son from her aggression." She attacked Tyler when he tried to collect what was rightfully his. There's video footage from the building security showing you shoving Miss Martinez to the ground while she was unarmed and trying to access her own office. How is that self-defense? She was hysterical, interfering with legitimate business operations. Catherine played the security footage then, letting the jury watch as Dennis grabbed me, shoved me twice, stood over me while I bled. There was nothing in that footage that supported his claims of self-defense or my aggression. Just a large man assaulting a smaller woman who was trying to protect her property. Tyler's testimony was more measured but equally unconvincing. He stuck to the script about verbal partnership agreements and his supposed capital contribution, but Catherine dismantled it methodically. She showed his bank records proving the $15,000 he'd withdrawn had gone to paying off personal debts and buying a used truck, not investing in my business. She presented my business accounts showing zero deposits from Tyler at any point. She walked him through text messages where he'd asked me for job references and career advice, communications that contradicted any notion of us being business partners. The most devastating moment came when Catherine asked Tyler about the movers. You told them Miss Martinez was your sister and might cause problems, correct? I wanted them to be prepared in case she showed up. But she wasn't your sister. She's your stepsister. Why lie about that relationship? Tyler stammered, realizing the trap. I guess I simplified it. Or you knew what you were doing was wrong and wanted to create a narrative where you were the wronged party. You needed the movers to think you had a legitimate family claim to that equipment so they wouldn't question taking it. That's not what happened. But Catherine had already made her point. The lie revealed consciousness of guilt, an understanding that what he was doing wouldn't stand up to scrutiny. Closing arguments took place on the 8th day of trial. Webb tried valiantly to create reasonable doubt, suggesting that family business dealings were messy and informal, that misunderstandings happened, that the physical altercation had been mutual combat blown out of proportion. But he couldn't explain away the forged signature or the stolen equipment or the elaborate planning that contradicted any innocent explanation. Catherine's closing was masterful. She reminded the jury that this wasn't about family dynamics or personality conflicts. It was about specific criminal acts proven by overwhelming evidence. Forged documents weren't misunderstandings. Assault captured on video wasn't mutual combat. Theft executed with hired movers and advanced planning wasn't a family dispute. The defendants want you to believe this is complicated, she said. That family relationships make criminal behavior somehow more understandable or forgivable. But the law is clear. You don't get to assault someone because they're related to you. You don't get to steal because you think you deserve what someone else built. You don't get to forge documents because a handshake deal didn't go your way. Crime is crime regardless of who commits it. The jury deliberated for 2 days. Marcus said that was good, that quick verdicts often meant acquittal while longer deliberations suggested jurors were taking the evidence seriously. I spent those 2 days in a fog of anxiety, unable to work or sleep or think about anything except what would happen if they walked free. When the verdict came, I was in Jenna's apartment trying to force down toast when Marcus called. They're ready, he said. Can you get to the courthouse in 30 minutes? We made it in 20, running through slushy streets with our hearts pounding. The courtroom was packed with reporters and curious observers drawn by the media coverage. My mother was there again, sitting alone this time, looking smaller and older than I remembered. The jury foreman stood, a middle-aged woman who owned a bakery and had seemed sympathetic throughout the trial. She handed the verdict forms to the bailiff, who passed them to Judge Morrison. The judge reviewed them silently, her face revealing nothing, then nodded to the foreman. On the charge of assault in the 3rd degree against Dennis Carr, how do you find? Guilty. On the charge of theft by deception against Dennis Carr, how do you find? Guilty. It continued through all the charges. Guilty. 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 Every count for both defendants. The jury had believed the evidence, had seen through the lies, had held them accountable. Dennis's face turned that familiar purple, rage and disbelief warring for dominance. Tyler looked shell-shocked, like he genuinely believed his charm and youth would save him. Webb slumped in his chair, a man who'd known from the start this case was unwinnable. Sentencing was scheduled for 6 weeks later. The judge remanded both defendants to custody immediately, revoking their bail now that they were convicted felons. As marshals led them away in handcuffs, my mother stood and tried to approach me across the courtroom divide. Marcus stepped between us, gentle but firm. "Not now, Linda. This isn't the time." She looked at me over his shoulder, her face crumpling. "I lost everything," she said. "My husband, my son, my daughter. How am I supposed to live with this?" "The same way I learned to live with being assaulted and betrayed," I replied. "One day at a time." Catherine found me in the hallway afterward, where I was standing with Jenna and Marcus trying to process what had just happened. She shook my hand formally, then pulled me into a brief hug. "You were incredibly brave," she said. "Most people in your situation would have settled, would have convinced themselves it wasn't worth the fight. You saw it through. That matters. What happens now?" "Sentencing. Based on the charges and their criminal history, Dennis is looking at 3 to 5 years. Tyler probably 18 months to 3 years. They'll serve time, then be on probation. The civil judgment stands, so you can pursue collection of damages once they're released." "Will they actually pay?" Catherine shrugged. "Probably not voluntarily. But you can garnish wages, put liens on property, make it expensive for them to ignore. It won't be fast or easy, but you have legal tools." The sentencing hearing 6 weeks later brought closure of a sort. Dennis got 4 years in federal prison followed by 3 years of supervised release. Tyler got 2 years followed by 2 years of probation. Both were ordered to pay full restitution of the civil judgment, though the judge acknowledged that collection would likely be difficult. I read a victim impact statement before sentencing, words I'd written and rewritten dozens of times trying to capture the full scope of damage. "What Dennis and Tyler did to me wasn't just about money or property," I told the court. "It was about using family connection as a weapon, exploiting my trust to gain access to my life and work, then destroying both when I refused to hand over what I'd built. I'll carry the physical scars from that assault for the rest of my life. I'll carry the psychological impact of having someone I considered family attack me without hesitation or remorse. But I'll also carry forward the knowledge that I didn't stay silent. That I fought back using legal tools and truth as weapons. I hope my willingness to pursue justice sends a message to others experiencing family betrayal that they deserve protection and accountability just as much as victims of stranger violence." Dennis glared at me throughout my statement, unrepentant to the end. Tyler cried, whether from genuine remorse or fear of prison I couldn't say and didn't care. When given a chance to address the court, Dennis blamed me for destroying the family. Tyler apologized, but it felt performative, words his lawyer had coached him to say. Judge Morrison was unmoved. She noted the premeditation, the violence, the complete lack of remorse, and imposed sentences that reflected the seriousness of their crimes. After it was over, after they'd been led away to begin their sentences, I walked out of that courthouse into a bright March afternoon feeling lighter than I had in months. Not happy exactly, not triumphant, but free. Free from the fear of encountering them. Free from the constant legal battles and court appearances. Free to rebuild without looking over my shoulder. The rebuilding took time and work and patience I didn't always have. I moved out of Jenna's apartment and into a new place in southeast Portland, a small house with a fenced yard and good locks on all the doors. I replaced the stolen equipment gradually as cash flow allowed, prioritizing what I needed most to serve clients. I hired a part-time employee, a recent Portland State graduate who reminded me of myself 5 years ago, hungry and capable and eager to prove herself. Some clients never came back, their trust too damaged by the security breach. But others stayed, and new clients came through referrals and word of mouth. The business grew differently than it had before, more cautiously but also more sustainably. I implemented better systems, stronger security protocols, clearer boundaries between personal and professional. Dr. Wong invited me to speak to her entrepreneurship class a year after the criminal trial concluded. Standing in front of 30 students and talking about crisis management and ethical business practices felt surreal. But it also felt right, turning trauma into teaching, using my experience to help others avoid similar pitfalls or handle them better if prevention failed. The questions afterward were thoughtful. How did I balance forgiveness with accountability? How did I decide when to involve lawyers versus handling things privately? How did I rebuild trust with clients after a security breach? I answered honestly, acknowledging the complexity, admitting I didn't have all the answers but sharing what I'd learned. One student, a quiet woman in the back, raised her hand near the end. My uncle stole from my dad's business and my dad never reported it because family. We lost everything. I wish he'd fought back like you did. I'm sorry that happened, I said. And I want you to know that fighting back doesn't always mean criminal prosecution. It means refusing to enable, setting boundaries, protecting yourself. Sometimes that looks like legal action. Sometimes it's just saying no and meaning it. Marcus and I stayed close, family by choice rather than accident of birth. He never charged me full rate for his legal work, said seeing justice done was payment enough, though I insisted on paying what I could. We had dinner monthly, his way of checking in without being intrusive, my way of staying connected to someone who'd shown me what advocacy looked like. Jenna and I grew Momentum Marketing into something stronger than it had been before the attack. We brought on 2 more full-time employees, moved into a proper office space with security systems and access controls, landed clients that doubled our revenue. The business that Dennis and Tyler had tried to destroy became more successful than ever, proof that their theft had failed in every way that mattered. My mother reached out once after Dennis and Tyler were incarcerated, a letter forwarded through Marcus's office. She was living with her sister in Eugene, working retail to survive after losing the house to civil judgment liens. She wanted to apologize, she said, wanted to explain that she'd been manipulated too, wanted a chance to rebuild our relationship. I read the letter once and filed it away unanswered. Maybe someday I'd be ready for that conversation. Maybe someday the anger would fade enough to make space for complicated forgiveness. But not yet. Not while the memories were still so raw, not while I was still learning to trust my own judgment after it had been so catastrophically wrong about family. 3 years after that terrible day at my office, I stood in the doorway of Momentum Marketing's new space in the Pearl District and felt something close to peace. We'd survived. More than survived. We'd grown stronger, smarter, more resilient. The scars remained, physical and psychological, but they no longer defined me. Jenna found me there, handed me coffee, smiled at whatever expression was on my face. Thinking about the journey? She asked. Thinking about how far we've come. How much we've built. We built it right this time. With people who deserve to be here. She was right. The team we'd assembled was loyal and talented and shared our values. The clients we served trusted us because we'd earned that trust through transparency and competence. The business itself was built on a foundation of integrity that nobody could steal or forge or destroy. That evening, I drove out to Cannon Beach, to the vacation property I'd reclaimed through the civil judgment. My father's cabin that my mother had hidden and rented out for profit. Marcus and I had won it back along with years of rental income, money that had funded the business rebuilding and the new office space. I walked along the beach as sunset painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, listening to waves crash against ancient rocks. This was mine now, legitimately and legally and completely. A place my father had loved that I could pass on to future generations without lies or hidden agendas or family members trying to claim what wasn't theirs. My phone buzzed with a message from Catherine Park. She'd moved on to other cases but still checked in occasionally. The message was brief. Saw Tyler's parole hearing was denied. Thought you'd want to know. I did want to know, wanted confirmation that consequences were still being enforced, that the system hadn't forgotten or forgiven prematurely. Tyler would serve his full sentence. Dennis would serve his. And I would keep building the life and business they'd tried to destroy. Standing there on that beach with the ocean stretching to the horizon and the cabin waiting behind me, I understood something important. Justice wasn't just about punishing wrongdoing. It was about reclaiming what had been taken, rebuilding what had been broken, and refusing to let someone else's cruelty determine your worth or future. I'd lost family, but I'd gained clarity. I'd lost trust, but I'd gained boundaries. I'd lost the naive belief that blood relation guaranteed loyalty, but I'd gained the wisdom to choose family based on actions rather than genetics. The sun dipped below the horizon, and I turned back toward the cabin. Tomorrow I'd return to Portland and dive back into the work of running a business and building relationships and living the life I'd fought so hard to protect. But tonight, I'd sit on this porch with coffee and quiet and the satisfaction of knowing I'd stood up when it mattered. I'd survived betrayal and violence and systematic theft. I'd used every legal tool available to hold perpetrators accountable. I'd rebuilt from rubble and made something stronger than before. And I'd done it without compromising my integrity or becoming the kind of person who let fear win. That was enough. That was everything. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.